Hi there, welcome back. This is the second part of the video where I compare group classes to one-to-one instruction. 3 weeks ago I already said that I regret not starting with one-to-one sessions earlier, and in the part 1 episode I already laid out the pros and cons of group sessions. Today I'll start off by discussing a couple of things with regards to the pricing of both class methods, and then I'll summarize everything I've said so far and explain why, in my opinion, one-to-one sessions win. In order to make a comprehensive analysis of this topic, it's not enough to just lay out the advantages and disadvantages of each of the methods. It's also important to consider how much or less each of the options cost. If online classes are great, as I've been claiming so far, but they are too costly for us, then we might as well end up going for another learning strategy. To this end, the first thing I'd like to draw your attention to is that private classes are not as expensive as you might think. The concept of private tutoring might come across as a rather elitist way of being educated. It might elicit the image of a tutor that goes to your house and spends 1 hour with you, which can indeed be very costly. That is partly the case because you're restricted to paying the salaries that are prevalent in your city. But this does not have to be the case if we bring the online option to the table, mainly because the teacher might find himself in another country. Let's assume you live in a Western metropolis. If you're learning a foreign language, there's a high likelihood that the tutor will find himself in a country that has a lower per capita income than yours. In that case, the salary he will require will be lower than the one that a teacher living in Boston, Paris, or Sydney may demand. Let me clarify what I just said with a couple of examples. If you want to learn Spanish or Russian, for instance, you can easily find online tutors that request an hourly wage of between 12 and 8 euros. Or if you're into Italian or Chinese, you can find coaches that charge between $10 and $15 per hour. And finding those prices for individual one-to-one language classes, if you live in a high-income country, is unlikely, to say the least. But let's now say that you want to learn languages that are spoken in wealthier countries, such as Norwegian or German. You could presume that the prices of online classes will be more expensive then. Well, even if that's the case, you are more likely to find the rates of online classes cheaper than the rates prevalent in your city. For one, because the pool of teachers you can find on an online platform is usually going to be larger than the amount of teachers you can find in your city or your neighborhood. That is, you have a bigger amount of options to choose from. Add to this that the format of language learning platforms makes it very easy for you to filter by price. On top of that, the services offered are quite homogeneous. This implies that customers can be quite price sensitive. That is, people looking for a language teacher are quite likely to base a big part of their decision on what the most affordable price is. Okay, that was a little bit of Econ 101 right there, but whatever. The thing is that the 3 points I just mentioned exert a downward pressure on prices. Alright, so far I've argued that online classes are not as expensive as you might think, and that they are certainly cheaper than face-to-face instructors. But I've not compared them to group lessons yet. If you do that, you might come to the conclusion that the hourly rate of online lessons is always going to be higher than the hourly rate of group classes. Although this can vary a lot from country to country and from language to language, I can very well imagine this to be true in the vast majority of the cases. But even if that is so, I'd still posit that you'd be better off by taking online classes. Let me explain why I deem this to be the case. Let's imagine you're someone looking for a language teacher and that you have to decide whether to go for online one-to-one sessions or for group classes. You have a budget constraint of $70 per month. The prices of the two options are 7 and 14 euros respectively, which means that you can either get 10 hours of group lessons or 5 hours of individual lessons per month. So you can get twice as many teaching hours per month if you go for the former option. But you should also keep in mind that 1 hour of individual tutoring has more worth than 1 hour of a group session. That is the case by definition, because you have the individual attention of the teacher. The question is thus whether the 5 extra hours of group sessions you have available per month are enough to tilt the balance in favor of that type of learning method. I would argue that this should not be the case. The way I see it is that if you choose one-to-one classes, you're not losing 5 hours of teaching per month, you're gaining 5 hours of personal study instead. That is, since you now have 5 hours of classes per month instead of 10, you can now use those 5 hours you're sparing to study languages on your own. And if you make the comparison between 1 hour of group class with 1 hour of studying the language on your own, I would say you can make more progress if you go for the latter option instead of merely listening to the teacher in a passive way in a classroom. Notice that in this last line of reasoning, I'm making the assumption that you'd be very efficient studying alone. And I'm also making the presupposition that you'd use the extra free time available that you have now, that you have chosen one-to-one classes instead of group classes, to study foreign languages and not to play video games or watch videos of Cristiano Ronaldo. So to sum up this first point, online individual classes are not as expensive as one might think. And even if they happen to be more expensive than group lessons, you should consider that one-to-one classes are by definition better, and that for the same overall price, you will have more time to study the language on your own if you go for individual tuition. Let's now recap everything I've said so far. Learning in groups has a few advantages and disadvantages. On the drawback side, we have that you can practice speaking, you can tailor the lessons to your needs, and that other students might slow you down. On the brighter side, though, we have that you are more likely to find a decent teacher, the teaching plan has probably been tested out more times, and you can connect with like-minded people. On top of that, you need to factor in that the prices of online lessons are usually quite low and that they offer a bigger bang for the buck. All things considered, I would clearly go for online lessons, and here's why. First and foremost, because of the first drawback I mentioned, namely that you can't practice speaking. In fact, I would go a step further and say that I abhor the idea of being a passive agent that just listens to the teacher. When you find yourself in a one-to-one conversation lesson with a native speaker, you must be, by definition, extremely focused. You must be at the edge of your capabilities to try to keep the conversation going. For instance, by thinking of the words you want to utter and trying to conjugate the verbs on the spot, all while attempting to maintain a decent pronunciation. And this sort of flow state you achieve in a conversation will not only make you enjoy the class more and make you feel more engaged, you're also more likely to make progress. Whereas in a 2-hour group class, you're much more likely to find yourself disengaged while listening how the teacher explains some grammar concepts. Also, I would posit that you can easily offset the advantages of group lessons. With regards to the first one I mentioned, finding a decent teacher, well, you can still find plenty of awesome tutors online. You just have to know how to do a proper screening, what type of red flags you should be aware of, and what types of features you'd like your teacher to have. Secondly, if you've found a good online teacher, then you can be quite confident that they will be able to craft a well-thought plan that will help you improve your level in the language. A plan which, by the way, will be more tailored to your needs. And finally, if you want to find some people that are learning the same language as you, well, then you can just resort to some social media sites and look them up. So all in all, I would go for online classes because its advantages are way more important than its drawbacks, given my personal preferences. And also because the upsides of group classes can be offset relatively easily. But that's just my case, which is based on my language learning goals and experience and on my personality. This could be different though for someone who has proclivities that are different from mine. If that happens to be your case, then let me know in the comment section what your reasons for choosing group classes are. I hope you found this video informative and that it made you reflect upon your learning methods a little bit. See you next week.